Redditor 1. There are two memories from my childhood and early adulthood that have haunted me ever since. Both encounters defy all the explanations I tried to give them over the years, and I still wake up at night with a chill, remembering those moments when the boundaries between our world and something else seemed to blur. I was 5 years old, barely able to comprehend the vast, mysterious world around me when I first encountered them. It was dawn, a time when the sky is a delicate blend of deep indigo and the softest hints of light. My cousin and I were camping in my family's backyard, a simple setup with a small tent pitched under towering pines that bordered our modest home in rural New England. I remember how the dew clung to the grass and how the air smelled of damp earth and prom. We were both excited by the novelty of spending the night outdoors, and I spent most of that early morning gazing in wonder at the awakening world. Then, as the darkness began to yield to the first light, I saw them, 3 figures that I would later come to know as the Greys. They appeared silently among the trees, their skin a smooth, featureless gray, their large, unblinking eyes fixed on me. I was frozen, completely paralyzed with terror. My little body refused to move, as if a force held me captive in that moment. I recall feeling a deep, visceral panic, the pounding of my tiny heart, the cold sweat that gathered on my brow. And yet, in that instant, time seemed to stretch into an eternity. The beings stood there, silently assessing me, before they turned and vanished just as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me trembling and confused in the soft light of dawn. I didn't understand what I had witnessed at that tender age, and I never told anyone about it for years, partly because the adults in my life dismissed such fears as mere childish imagination. Years later, when I was 19, I encountered something that shook me to the core in a completely different way. I was on a camping trip in New Mexico, a vast, arid landscape that was as haunting as it was beautiful. Our camp was set in a remote field near a school for deaf kids, a place where silence felt like a presence all its own. The night was unusually still, the cool desert air was crisp against my skin, and the full moon cast an otherworldly glow over everything. Around 3 a.m., my friends and I were snug in our tents, the crackling of a small fire a comforting background murmur. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the calm. We all bolted upright, hearts hammering as we exchanged terrified glances. Before any of us could fully process the sound, one of my friends shouted that he had heard something. A loud, sustained noise that seemed to come from nowhere, driven by equal parts adrenaline and the need to understand. We all crept out of our tents and huddled together in the field, flashlights trembling in our hands. That's when we saw it. A massive, glowing object hovering in the center of the field, about 30 feet away. It looked bizarre, like an upside-down lampshade suspended in mid-air. The object pulsed with an eerie, almost hypnotic light that changed colors slowly, shifting from a ghostly white to a deep, unsettling amber. For a long moment, we simply stared at it, our flashlights barely piercing the darkness, the object's glow reflecting off our wide, fearful eyes. I remember the atmosphere being charged with a sense of foreboding. The usual background sounds of the desert, rustling wind, distant calls of nocturnal animals, seemed to fade away, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed on us from all sides. I felt as if my very soul was suspended in that moment, caught between terror and an inexplicable fascination. Then, as if on cue, the object began to move. Slowly, it drifted upward, as if lifted by an unseen force, and then, without warning, it accelerated rapidly. I watched in frozen awe as it shot upward into the night sky, its brilliant light bursting like a firework. In that instant, the object popped, vanishing in a burst of incandescent brilliance that left the field bathed in an eerie afterglow for just a moment before all returned to silence. I can still recall the sensations vividly, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight, and the taste of fear so metallic on my tongue that I wondered if I was actually in danger. That night, we stood there in the field, our eyes fixed on the sky, trying to process what we had witnessed. None of us spoke a word for several agonizing minutes. Finally, the shock subsided into a numb, collective silence, and we slowly made our way back to our tents, each of us haunted by the inexplicable experience. Back at camp, I couldn't help but replay the incident over and over in my mind. I started questioning everything. Was it a hallucination born of exhaustion, or had we really seen something that defied our understanding of physics? The more I tried to rationalize it, the more I was drawn to the mystery of it all. I even attempted to sketch the object later that morning, trying to capture its bizarre, upside-down lampshade shape and the way its light seemed to shimmer with life. But the sketch was nothing more than a blurry, shaky representation of the truth, a truth that I knew lay far beyond my simple drawings. The memory of that night in New Mexico became a silent mark on my life, a reminder that there are moments when the universe reveals its most inexplicable secrets, leaving us with more questions than answers. As I grew older, I would occasionally revisit those memories, sometimes alone on my porch or in the quiet of my room, wondering what force had orchestrated those events. I delved into research about anomalous aerial phenomena, reading accounts from people who, like us, had witnessed strange lights and inexplicable objects in the night sky. Some theories suggested it was a natural atmospheric phenomenon, a rare meteor or plasma event, but none of them quite captured the precise, almost deliberate behavior of that object. Even now, years later, I find myself glancing upward on clear nights, the memory of that bizarre, upside-down lampshade still vivid in my mind. I sometimes imagine that what I witnessed was not merely a random occurrence, but a message, a brief, incandescent whisper from a realm beyond our own. And though I remain skeptical of the more fantastical explanations, I cannot ignore the sheer impact of that experience. It shattered my childhood innocence and imprinted on me a profound sense of wonder and fear, a reminder that the world is far more mysterious than it appears. I don't share these memories lightly. In many circles, such experiences are dismissed as the fanciful tales of an overactive imagination. But for me, they are as real as the ground beneath my feet, and as vivid as the starlight that lit up that remote field. They are a part of who I am, a testament to a time when I was both terrified and utterly enthralled by the inexplicable. And so, even as I live a relatively ordinary life, I carry these memories with me, a quiet, persistent reminder that sometimes, when the world is still and the night is deep, the universe opens a small window to its darkest, most beautiful mysteries. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more jaw-dropping tales, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 2. There's a family story that's been passed down quietly, almost like a secret. And I've only heard it twice. I can't remember exactly how it was first brought up, but a few months later during a rare summer gathering at our cottage, the story emerged again with more details, though still vague in some aspects. My relatives, who live in Ukraine, took a trip to Turkey sometime in the 90s and rented a little cottage deep in the countryside, far enough from any town to be considered truly remote. According to what I've been told, one evening at that Turkish cottage, everything seemed perfectly ordinary at first. The family had settled in for the night, the air cool and quiet, with the distant hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves creating a natural lullaby. But then, out of nowhere, the dogs began going absolutely crazy. They barked viciously and behaved erratically, their cries piercing the calm night. One of my grandmother's brothers, at least that's what they call him, dashed outside to investigate. He said he saw something that defies simple explanation, a UFO, as they could only describe it. He claimed that high up in the sky, a huge triangular object was approaching the cottage. It was unlike anything one would expect to see. The object was unmistakably saucer-like in shape, with 3 distinct lights, one at each corner of the triangle. The lights glowed with a steady brilliance that cut through the darkness, and as it drew nearer, it began to lower its altitude slightly. The family, already on edge from the frenzied barking of the dogs, began to panic. The very walls of the cottage started shaking with vibrations so powerful that dishes fell and shattered on the floor. The sound was deafening in its sudden chaos, an assault on every sense. I've been told that after those terrifying moments, the UFO hovered ominously over the cottage for several minutes. It was as if time had slowed down during those moments of intense fear. Then, as abruptly as it had arrived, the object split into 2 separate lights. One of the lights, tinted with a cool blue flame, shot off rapidly into the sky in one direction, while the other mirrored the movement, darting off in the opposite direction. After that, everything returned to normal. The vibrations ceased, the dogs calmed, and the family retreated indoors in shock. Those who are still alive insist that they saw the same thing, even though they rarely speak of it openly. They're a very conservative and rational bunch, and they despise any talk of the supernatural, so the story is kept carefully under wraps. I find it hard to believe any of it could be fabricated. I mean, imagine the sheer terror of that night. Dishes breaking, walls shaking, and the unmistakable, pulsating glow of an alien craft hovering above your temporary home in a foreign land. It's a story that defies conventional explanation, and even though I wasn't there, I can feel its weight every time I think about it. I've spent many nights pondering over the details that have been passed down in hushed tones over family reunions. Some say the object was simply a natural phenomenon, maybe a rare atmospheric plasma event, or some form of luminous meteorological anomaly that only occurs under very specific conditions. But the way it behaved, the precise triangular formation, the 3 steady lights, the vibrations that shook the very foundations of the cottage, suggest something else entirely. It wasn't a fleeting meteor, it was an encounter, an intrusion into that quiet, secluded night that left a permanent scar on those who witnessed it. I imagine that, as the story goes, after the creature's light split and shot off into the heavens, the family gathered what little evidence they could. They tried to explain away the strange vibrations, dismissing it as the after effects of some heavy machinery in the distance, or perhaps the natural settling of an old building. But deep down, they knew that what they had seen wasn't mundane. My grandmother's brother, who was the one to first witness the UFO, would later remark in a rare, serious tone that he'd never seen anything like it. Not in all his years, not in all the remote places he'd visited. His voice would drop to a whisper as he recounted the moment when the lights, like sentinels of another world, descended upon the cottage and transformed the ordinary night into a tableau of cosmic horror. Over the years, that memory has been a source of both terror and fascination for our family. In a way, it became a rite of passage, a reminder that even in a world ruled by logic and reason, there are mysteries that defy explanation. The fact that it happened during a family trip in the 90s, when everyone was on edge in a foreign land, only added to its mystique. The old cottage in Turkey became more than just a vacation spot. It became a silent witness to an event that none of us could ever forget, a moment that somehow linked our family's past to the vast, uncharted mysteries of the universe. I have always admired the rational, measured nature of my relatives, those who could look at such an encounter and dismiss it as an overactive imagination or a trick of the light. And yet, despite their skepticism, they all admit that something extraordinary must have happened that night. In hushed conversations at family gatherings, when the topic of strange occurrences inevitably comes up, someone will always mention the night at the cottage. The details vary. Sometimes the object is described as a glowing disc, sometimes as a triangular craft with 3 distinct lights. But the core of the story remains unchanged. A night when the sky was no longer a distant, indifferent canvas, but a stage for something unfathomably mysterious. I like to think that our experience was not an isolated incident. Throughout history, people have reported similar sightings, whether it's the famous sightings of the 1920s in our own family, or modern accounts of strange aerial phenomena that still baffle scientists. The idea that there might be a natural explanation, something like a plasma ball or an unusual meteorological event, is both comforting and maddeningly unsatisfying, because deep down, the way the craft moved, the way it split, and the powerful vibrations it sent through the cottage, those details hint at something that goes beyond the natural world. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the memories of that summer trip surface in my mind, I imagine what it would be like to witness that event again. I picture the old cottage, the sprawling Turkish countryside under a starlit sky, and the sudden, terrifying appearance of an alien craft that defies all understanding. In those moments, I feel both a deep connection to my family's hidden history and an overwhelming fear that some truths are best left undiscovered. I keep this story to myself, partly out of respect for my relatives who are too conservative to openly discuss such matters, and partly out of a personal need to hold on to a secret that has defined part of my life. Every time I look up at a clear night sky, I can't help but wonder if the universe might once again reveal one of its secrets. If somewhere out there, in a remote corner of the world, an alien craft might once more grace the heavens with its inexplicable presence. For now, all I have are the memories and the whispered details passed down through generations, a family legacy of mystery that reminds us that sometimes even the most ordinary of nights can be transformed by the extraordinary, leaving us forever changed, forever in awe of the unknown. Redditor 3. There was one night during my time as a security officer in Madison that still sends shivers down my spine. I used to work third shift, escorting high-profile clients from a hotel to Dane County Airport, usually between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. It was a monotonous routine. Endless dark highways, flickering streetlights, and the constant hum of my car engine. But one particular shift changed everything. It was around 11 p.m. on a chilly autumn night. I was driving with an elderly man, a quiet sort who rarely spoke more than a few words, as we headed west. We had just left a hotel near Boron, California, and were making our way to the airport when conversation drifted to his work. To my surprise, he revealed that he had business near Baraboo at an abandoned facility known as the Badger Ammo Plant. According to local lore, the plant had been shut down for over 15 years, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by towering bluffs so immense that the center was hidden from view, and with strict regulations that even forbade flyovers. I couldn't fathom why anyone would have business there. I asked him, "Why the heck do you have business at a closed ammo plant?" He gave me a wry smile, his eyes glinting under the dim interior lights. "Do you really think they have armed guards at the gates of a closed plant?" he replied casually. I frowned, processing his words. "So you're working out there?" I pressed. "Yes," he said simply. "Out there, they have huge cement bunkers that can't be seen or heard by anyone. We test experimental propulsion systems in secret. No one can see or hear what we're doing. They use it because it's low-key, private, and officially it's not in use." I couldn't help but let a laugh escape me, half in disbelief. "Oh, sweet. So you test motors for going to the moon or outer space?" He shook his head slowly, a small, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "No. These motors are for going to other planets." My jaw dropped. For a moment, the mundane world of dark highways and routine escort shifts dissolved into something extraordinary, something unthinkable. I dared to ask, "Do you believe in aliens?" He paused, his eyes shifting away from mine as if guarding some ancient secret. "Let's just say what I work on helps make them possible," he murmured, leaving the explanation hanging in the air like a forbidden truth. Without another word, he turned his gaze out the window, as if lost in thought, and we continued our drive in a heavy silence. When we arrived at the airport, he tipped me $5 and slipped away, leaving me to wonder if I'd just been part of a cosmic joke. For years afterward, I replayed that conversation in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I've always prided myself on being a skeptical man, one who trusts in logic and rational explanations. Yet the memory of that night clings to me, an unexplainable intrusion into the ordinary, a secret whispered under the cloak of darkness. I've seen plenty of satellites and aircraft in my lifetime, but what he described was something altogether different. His words hinted at technology so advanced, so hidden from public view, that it could propel us from planet to planet. And though he never said the word alien, I couldn't shake the feeling that what he was hinting at belonged to a realm beyond our own understanding. I started researching, digging through old military reports and obscure online forums about black projects and unexplained aerial phenomena. The more I read, the more I realized that the universe might be far stranger than we dare to admit. Some people claim to have seen similar experimental craft, objects that didn't behave like any conventional aircraft, moving with an agility and precision that defied physics. Others whispered about encounters with beings from other worlds, though most of those stories were dismissed as the ramblings of deluded minds. Still, every so often, I'd catch a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, my encounter with that old patrolman wasn't a lie. But even as the years passed and I tried to move on with life, the memory of that night remains a quiet specter. I still drive those dark highways, and sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the stars blink in the vast emptiness above, I feel a shiver run down my spine. The idea that there might be secret propulsion systems and hidden projects operating in the shadows of our everyday world is both terrifying and mesmerizing. It reminds me that the cosmos is a vast, unfathomable expanse, full of mysteries that our small, rational minds can scarcely comprehend. I don't talk about it much. In Madison, where most people prefer to believe in the ordinary and the practical, my story is met with laughter and dismissive remarks. That's just a tall tale, they say. You're overthinking it. But I know what I heard that night. And I know that somewhere out there, something incredible is happening. Something that might one day redefine everything we know about our place in the universe. I often wonder about that old patrolman and his secret work at the abandoned ammo plant near Baraboo. Was he truly involved in testing propulsion systems that could carry us to other planets? Or was he part of a larger, hidden network of experiments, cloaked in secrecy and hidden from public view? The more I think about it, the more I realize that I might never have the answers. But perhaps that is for the best. Some truths I've learned are meant to be shrouded in mystery, unresolved, enigmatic, and always just out of reach. So, on dark, quiet nights when I'm driving home through the endless stretches of highway, I sometimes pause and look up at the stars, wondering if there's a hidden world of secrets out there, one where advanced technology and unexplainable phenomena intertwine in ways that challenge everything I've ever known. And though most of us are content with the mundane explanations, a small part of me will always believe in the extraordinary, because I've heard the truth whispered in the dark, and I know it's out there, waiting to be discovered. Redditor 4. Three nights changed everything for me. I was only a kid when it all began, maybe around 5 or 6. And though the memories are hazy, they remain etched into my soul. I grew up with stories of alien abductions whispered in hushed tones, but nothing prepared me for what happened to me. The first night remains the vaguest in my memory. I was camping in the backyard with my cousin, a simple night under a sky too vast for my little mind. It was dawn, and while the world was still half asleep, I sat quietly, mesmerized by the dim glow of early light. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something unusual, a peculiar sensation that seemed to wrap around the top of my head and travel slowly down my neck. It was like a static massage, almost pleasant, but laden with a deep, inexplicable fear. I remember thinking, this is new. This has never happened before. The sensation frightened me more than I cared to admit, and soon I scrambled back into bed. Later that night, I awoke again. I found myself on my back, staring at the window. But what I saw wasn't the world outside as it should be. The glass appeared to ripple, morphing in an array of innumerable colors, swirling blues, fiery reds, soft pinks, all blending together in a chaotic dance. Even though I was hallucinating terribly, I was aware, completely awake. In that delirium, I recalled that these hallucinations were something I'd experienced before. They were almost a nightly greeting from the unknown. It was odd. I was both terrified and, in a strange way, comforted. By the time morning broke, I realized with a start that I don't actually hallucinate every night. That realization only deepened my confusion about what truly happened that night. Then came the second night. The sensation returned. Again, a strange, almost electric feeling at the top of my head, a whisper of static that made my hair stand on end. I went to sleep, and when I woke this time, I found myself on my stomach, staring at the glowing lights of my computer tower. On the floor before me, symbols, faint, shifting symbols, maninated from the blue and orange lights. I was visibly tripping, my mind barely able to process the surreal scene unfolding before me. Even then, in my altered state, I managed a moment of calm. I told myself, it's normal. This is just one of those weird recurring dreams. But the strangeness of it all, the inexplicable patterns, the way the symbols danced across the floor, stayed with me long after I woke. But nothing prepared me for the third night, the night that would change everything. I remember waking up with a start, an image so vivid that it seared itself into my memory. There, hovering in front of me, were three beings. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, a stark vision of the classic grays, but with an intensity that made them unforgettable. Their skin was a flat, unyielding gray, their heads, enormous and disproportionate, seemed almost to float atop their slender bodies. They were much taller than any human I had ever encountered, and yet they moved with a quiet, measured grace. The backdrop was a landscape of rocky earth, illuminated as if by an extremely starry sky overhead. Yet there was no other light present, just the eerie glow of these beings. For a split second, the image flashed so clearly before my eyes that I could almost count every vertebra on my spine, as if the aliens had been doing just that. Then, suddenly, darkness swallowed the vision, and I found myself staring into the closed lids of my eyes. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, I felt an incredible sensation wash over me. Although I could feel that I was confined within my own body, there was also a vast, open expanse around me, a presence that was both terrifying and liberating. It was an experience beyond words, something like the attainment of nirvana in a Buddhist sense. In that moment, I felt connected to everything: the earth beneath me, the vast cosmos above, and the endless possibilities that lay in between. That night, I drifted off to sleep with tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by a mix of love, terror, and a profound sense of loss. When I awoke the next morning, I was shaken to my core. I couldn't explain what had happened to me, only that it had been real, more real than any dream I had ever had. Over the years, as I grew older and became an academic, I found myself compelled to understand what had happened during those 3 nights. I dived into research, exploring topics like past life regressions, channeling, astral projection, and even various accounts of alien abduction. I read about channeled experiments where researchers asked supposed higher dimensional entities what their reality was like, and the responses were described in shamanic, trippy terms, like achieving a state of heightened consciousness or even nirvana. I discovered that some of these extraterrestrial encounters might not be physical at all, that abductions could be experiences that occur in a dream state, a realm where the normal rules of our reality no longer apply. In my search for answers, I encountered countless theories, some dismissed as pseudoscience by one half of my mind, while the other half remained open and inquisitive. I learned that not all alien abduction experiences are negative. Some even suggest that these beings are here to guide us, to help us fulfill our destinies. They're not necessarily hostile. Rather, they might be part of a grand cosmic plan, reaching out telepathically to influence our paths, to offer a glimpse into a higher reality. This realization, though it came slowly, has made me somewhat content. I now consider that my abduction experiences took place in a dream state, a vivid, transformative series of events that, despite the initial terror, ended up being a damn good, albeit terrifying, experience. I still remember the large, unsettling image of the gray aliens, especially the one who appeared to be a sort of overseer, her eyes deep and knowing, her presence both terrifying and strangely comforting in its clarity. She spoke to me telepathically, urging me not to waste the world by creating too much trash, to stop cutting down so many trees, and to understand that I was part of a larger project, something that transcended my earthly existence. She made me feel that I was needed, that my life had a purpose in this grand cosmic tapestry. I wasn't ready to accept it, though. All I wanted was to go home, to return to the safety of a world where I controlled my own mind and my own destiny. For a long time after that night, I struggled with my memories. I'd lie awake at night, feeling a constant dread that someone or something might invade my thoughts again. I developed a deep-seated fear of needles, of any sensation that might remind me of that invasive touch. I found myself cautious of every small sound, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind through the trees, as if each noise could be a harbinger of that same abduction, a silent return of those gray visitors. I'd sometimes catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, and for a split second, I'd believe that the aliens were back, counting my vertebrae in the dark. I've never been one to share these experiences openly. Most people dismiss alien abduction stories as the ramblings of a disturbed mind. Yet I know what I felt and what I experienced. Those 3 nights changed me profoundly. They shattered my childhood illusions and forced me to confront a reality that was both terrifying and wondrous. I've spent years researching, reading every book and article I could find, trying to reconcile those experiences with my rational mind. I've learned that in the realm of abduction phenomena, truth and illusion often dance a fine line, and the more we try to understand it, the less we seem to know. I don't consider myself an alien believer in the cliched sense. I'm not convinced that little gray beings are the harbingers of doom, but I do believe that there is something out there, an intelligence, perhaps not originally of this earth, that reaches out to us in mysterious ways. The experience taught me that the boundaries between our world and the unknown are thinner than we think. I still wake up with a lingering sense of disempowerment, as if someone has invaded my innermost sanctum, and I cannot shake the memory of that invasion. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I sometimes feel that chilling presence, a reminder that my mind, my very essence, was once touched by something beyond comprehension. I carry that memory with me like a scar, a permanent mark of the night when I was taken, not physically abducted, but mentally and spiritually invaded, by forces I can barely describe. And though I try to live my life as normally as possible, the echoes of that experience are never far away, a quiet reminder that we are never truly alone in the vast, enigmatic cosmos. Redditor 5. When I was a kid living on the edge of a state forest, I experienced something that still sends shivers down my spine. Back then, my friends and I would spend countless afternoons venturing into those deep woods, exploring every hidden trail and secret clearing we could find. As we got older, entering middle school, we started camping and taking long hikes just to unwind and feel free in the wild. It was a time of innocent adventure, where the forest was our playground and the stars our ceiling. One particular night stands out in my memory with unnerving clarity. I had left my house at around 8 p.m., determined to take a solo walk along a trail I knew well. I walked with my eyes occasionally closing, not to sleep, but to just feel the cool breeze on my face and to clear my mind. The path was familiar, winding through tall pines and whispering leaves. For about 20 minutes, I strolled through a small clearing where the forest opened up to a panoramic view of the night sky. I settled down for a moment on a fallen log, gazing upward at the vast, ink-black expanse studded with stars. At first, I thought I saw a distant airplane crossing overhead, a speck of light, moving steadily like the routine passage of a satellite. But as I watched, something caught my eye. The light wasn't moving in a straight line. Instead, it hovered, its brilliance pulsing slowly, as if it were alive. I leaned back, confused, and felt an odd sensation in my chest, a rhythmic throb that seemed to sync perfectly with the pulsing light above. It was as if the sky itself were echoing my heartbeat, a quiet, steady drum that filled the clearing with an eerie sense of connection. For about 15 minutes, I sat there in that clearing, lost in the strange interplay between my racing heart and the pulsating light. The scene was almost hypnotic, the light's gentle throbs merging with the soft rustling of the leaves and the distant call of an owl. I told myself it was just a coincidence, a trick of my tired mind perhaps, or a rare atmospheric anomaly that I'd never seen before. Reluctantly, I shook off the feeling, stood up, and made my way back along the trail, still pondering the inexplicable pulse that had resonated in my chest. When I finally reached home, the night had deepened into an almost surreal silence. I expected the familiar glow from the streetlights and the hum of activity in the house, but something was off. Every light was off. The darkness of my home was complete, as if the energy had been sucked out of it. I shrugged it off as my parents having left early to sleep, given the hour. But as I fumbled with the plug for my phone charger in the living room, I glanced at the clock and was startled to see that it was 2 a.m. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there in that quiet, dark room. The discrepancy between the time I had left and the time on the clock unsettled me further. Had I lost track of time on my walk? Or was there something else, something unexplainable that had stolen those hours away from me? I replayed the earlier moments in my mind, the clear, starry sky, that solitary pulsing light, and the strange sensation in my chest. I wondered if the two were connected somehow, a sign or a message perhaps from the cosmos itself. In the following days, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I'd find myself wandering the edge of the forest during twilight, my eyes constantly scanning the sky for any hint of that pulsing light. I'd often recall the sensation, the rhythmic throb that mimicked my heartbeat, The way it made me feel as though I were part of something much larger than myself. I asked my parents about the time discrepancy, but they only said that they thought I'd been out too long enjoying the cool night air. I knew deep down that there was something else, something inexplicable at work that night. At school, I tried to talk about it with a friend, but he just laughed it off and told me I was imagining things. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you," he said dismissively, but his smile faded when I looked him in the eye. I wasn't sure if he truly believed it or was just being polite. That uncertainty only deepened my own confusion and lingering fear. I became obsessed with trying to understand that night. I spent hours researching atmospheric phenomena and even dabbled in some early online forums where people shared similar stories. Some mentioned strange lights, unusual pulses in the sky, even cases where time seemed to warp, moments where a single minute felt like an eternity. I couldn't help but wonder if what I had experienced was part of something bigger, a fleeting glimpse into a realm where the normal rules of time and space no longer applied. Yet, despite all my efforts, I found no satisfying explanation. I recalled the sensation vividly: the cool night air, the crisp sound of my footsteps on the trail, the gentle whisper of the wind mingled with the soft thud of my heartbeat, and above it all, that solitary light, pulsing like a beacon in the vast darkness. It wasn't erratic or chaotic, it was deliberate, almost as if it were trying to communicate with me. But what could it possibly say? I was too young to understand, and the memory, though it had grown fainter over time, still held an undeniable power over me. Now, as an adult, I still find myself glancing upward whenever the sky is clear, wondering if that mysterious light will ever reappear. I live a practical life in Southern California, where the stars are often hidden behind a veil of city lights. But I make a point of visiting remote areas now and then, just to catch a glimpse of that unspoiled night sky. I sometimes feel that on clear nights, the universe might reveal itself once more. Just a brief flash of pulsing light that echoes that strange, terrifying moment of my childhood. And when that happens, I'm reminded that no matter how much we try to wrap ourselves in the mundane rhythms of daily life, the cosmos is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, if only we dare to look. I don't speak of that night much, not openly. Most people dismiss such stories as the fanciful tales of an overactive imagination or the remnants of childhood dreams. But I know what I felt. The cold rush of the night air, the inexplicable throb that matched the light above, and the quiet disquiet of realizing that time, too, could be manipulated by forces unknown. And so, whenever I walk along the trails of that old state forest or sit quietly on my porch, I carry with me the memory of that one night. A night that transformed my understanding of the world and left me with a lingering question. What if the universe is not as fixed and predictable as we believe? Redditor 6. I still remember my father's story as if it were etched in my mind. It was 1982, and my father was stationed on a military base in New Brunswick. One chilly night, shortly after dark, his best friend and his girlfriend left the base. They were off to see a movie called Tron, although, truth be told, there wasn't even a proper theater nearby. They had a long drive ahead of them, and they said their goodbyes before departing about an hour later. The story took a strange turn, though. A few days later, my father's friend returned to the base, and the car he had been riding in was covered in a chaotic array of paint colors, and clearly badly damaged. My father, ever the practical man, asked him what had happened and why they hadn't made it to the movie, but his friend simply brushed him off and went to bed, leaving my father with the uneasy feeling that something extraordinary had occurred. According to his friend's later account, which he finally confided in my father a few days afterward, the incident had taken place on a deserted stretch of highway. They were driving through an area that was nothing but trees and rolling hills when, upon rounding a bend, they saw a cluster of strange, inexplicable lights coming from over a hill. There was no source of light for miles, just the natural darkness of the countryside. At the base of that hill, there was a narrow entrance parking lot for a park of some kind. One by one, cars began pulling into the lot to investigate the anomaly, and my father's friend had driven in as well. They all got out of their cars, preparing to hike up the hill to see the lights for themselves. Then, almost out of nowhere, a huge, disc-shaped object with flashing lights rose up above the hill's peak. It emitted a loud, strange sound that shattered the silence of the night. Panic erupted instantly. Everyone ran for their cars, desperately trying to escape through the narrow entrance. The chaos was surreal, cars scraping against one another, parts of vehicles breaking off, and splatters of paint transferring from one car to the next as they jostled in their frantic bid for safety. My father's friend and the others managed to drive back to the base as fast as possible, and a few days later my father was taken by his friend to the very spot where the event had occurred. What they found there was nothing short of bizarre. Car mirrors, bits of plastic, and other miscellaneous parts littered the parking lot, evidence of a chaotic, unexplainable incident. Then, as if that wasn't enough, a few days later, men in black suits appeared on the base, looking for anyone who might have witnessed what happened. They talked briefly to my father's friend, their faces impassive, then sent him on his way. When my father pressed for details, asking what they had wanted to see or why they were there, the friend told him, with a grave tone and a hint of menace, that he'd better shut up about it and not tell anyone what had happened if he wanted to keep his military career. I grew up hearing that story in hushed tones, a piece of family lore wrapped in mystery and fear. My father never elaborated further, but I could sense the weight of that night in his eyes, an unspoken knowledge that something far beyond our understanding had touched their lives. Over time, I've come to realize that incidents like these, dismissed by many as tall tales or the ramblings of an overactive imagination, have a way of lingering in the recesses of one's mind. I often find myself lying awake at night, the memory of that strange, flashing disc and the chaos that ensued playing over and over in my head. I remember the details as if they were etched in time. The dark, winding highway, the eerie quiet punctuated by sudden bursts of chaos, and the men in black whose brief, chilling warning still echoes in my ears. I try to rationalize it, to believe that it was a malfunction, perhaps a rogue experimental craft, or even a natural phenomenon we have yet to fully understand. But deep down, I know that it was something else entirely. The precision of the lights, the bizarre behavior of the object, and the way it disrupted the night with a force that left vehicles battered and the ground strewn with fragments. All of it points to an encounter that defies our conventional understanding of physics and reason. I've often wondered what it all meant. Was it a secret military project gone awry? Did these men in black truly want to silence those who witnessed the event, to bury the truth deep within the corridors of power? Or was it something even more profound, an encounter with a phenomenon that exists at the very edges of our reality, a glimpse into a world that we are not meant to fully comprehend? The questions swirl in my mind, each one as unsettling as the last, leaving me with a persistent feeling of disquiet that I can never fully shake off. I sometimes imagine that, on that dark night, the universe opened a small window, a brief, chaotic flash of cosmic truth that left the world altered in its wake. And even though I was just a kid then, listening to the disjointed recounting of events from my father's friend, I felt a surge of both terror and wonder. It was a moment that transcended the ordinary, a moment when time itself seemed to fracture, when the boundaries between our world and something beyond it blurred, leaving us with a memory that has haunted my family for decades. Now, as I sit quietly and reflect on those events, I can almost hear the distant hum of that night, the sound of a highway turned chaotic, the murmurs of men in black, and the echoes of vehicles scraping together in desperate flight. It's a memory that remains locked away, a secret too profound to share openly, yet one that continues to shape my understanding of the world. Every time I pass by a dark, deserted road or catch a glimpse of a strange light in the distance, I'm reminded of that fateful night. I carry the weight of that encounter with me, a silent, unyielding reminder that in this vast, unpredictable universe, some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, lingering in the shadows, whispering secrets that we may never fully comprehend. Redditor 7. I've carried a family secret that has haunted our lineage for nearly a century. It's a story my grandfather and other older folk have whispered in hushed tones, one that they claim happened sometime between 1935 and 1945 in a small village in northern Iraq. I remember the details only as fragments, passed down over generations, but they remain as vivid to me as if I witnessed it myself. Back then, life in our village was simple and unhurried. The summers were a time for farming and tending to the land, while the harsh, snowy winters forced everyone indoors. Winter was also the season for weddings, when families gathered in celebration amid the biting cold. It was at one such wedding, held at an old reception building on the outskirts of the village, that the unexplainable occurred. My grandfather, a stern but kind man whose eyes still held the glimmer of that distant past, recalled the evening with a mixture of awe and lingering dread. The wedding dinner was in full swing. Men in traditional attire, women adorned in colorful fabrics despite the chill, and a local singer providing the entertainment. The singer was well known in the village for his soulful voice, and his performance had everyone enchanted. But then, something unusual disrupted the festive air. As the dinner progressed, the singer excused himself to relieve himself. A normal enough occurrence, except that in those days, modern toilets were a luxury. Instead, he would walk out a short distance to a designated waste area, a practice as old as time in that remote part of northern Iraq. That night, however, he did not return when expected. An hour passed, and the guests began to murmur with concern. The groom, his face etched with worry and rising anger, demanded to know where the singer had gone. Unable to bear the uncertainty, one of the older men, my grandfather himself as the story goes, stepped outside to investigate. The night was frigid, the air crisp with the scent of impending snow. The area around the cottage was dimly lit by a few oil lamps, and the only sounds were the quiet whispers of the wind and the distant murmur of village life. As my grandfather approached the entrance to the compound, he noticed something peculiar. Tracks in the soft earth that ran in one direction, but then abruptly stopped. There were clear footprints, as though someone had been trekking steadily, but then no further evidence, no squat prints or disturbed snow where one might expect, as if the person had simply vanished into thin air. Puzzled and increasingly anxious, my grandfather returned to the reception. The tension in the room was palpable. Guests exchanged worried glances, and the mood had shifted from celebration to unease. Half an hour later, the singer reappeared. His face was pale, his eyes haunted, and he carried something in his hands that no one could explain. A small, carefully wrapped bouquet of flowers. The groom erupted in anger, demanding an explanation, and the singer, voice trembling yet oddly composed, began to recount what he had experienced that night. According to the singer's version, as he had set off towards the waste area, he was suddenly approached from behind by two figures. They emerged from the darkness like phantoms, their features obscured by the shadows of the night. One of them spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from another realm, asking, "Do you want to go somewhere far?" Bewildered and frightened, the singer asked what they meant by far. Their reply was both simple and staggering. "How about China?" At that moment, a strange, floating vehicle, one that defied any conventional description, hovered above the pair. It was as if the very air around them had taken on a life of its own, and the vehicle, circular and shimmering, seemed to be waiting for its passenger. The two figures gently grasped the singer by the arm and led him toward the vehicle. With a sensation of weightlessness and a rush of cold air, he was drawn into it. He recalled that the journey was swift. He was flown high into the sky, far above the snow-laden mountains of his homeland, and then, before he knew it, he was over a foreign land where the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of blossoms. He wandered for a while in that distant place, roaming among fields of vibrant, real flowers that could never have grown in the bitter winter of northern Iraq. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, he was returned to the village. He found himself back at the reception building as if no time had passed at all, except now, clutched in his hands, was the inexplicable bouquet. The guests were in shock. The singer's story was met with a mix of disbelief and hushed whispers. Many dismissed it as the drunken ramblings of a man who had perhaps taken too long on his evening walk, but the evidence was hard to ignore. My grandfather and several of the older men swore that they had seen the bouquet with their own eyes, a bouquet of flowers that could not possibly have come from a snowy, barren winter landscape. It was a mystery that defied logic, one that left an indelible mark on all who witnessed it. In the days following the incident, the mood of the wedding shifted. While most people tried to brush it off as a strange anomaly, a palpable undercurrent of unease persisted. The singer, for reasons unknown, never performed again that night. and though the event was never openly discussed, it became a legend, an unspoken truth passed down among the villagers. My grandfather, a man of rational thought and practical wisdom, never forgot that night. He often said that it was one of those moments that change the way you see the world, when the impossible becomes possible and reality is stretched thin. I've thought about that story many times since. I wonder about the nature of the figures who approached the singer. Were they visitors from another world, or merely agents of something more enigmatic, something that exists between the realms of the known and the unknown? I ponder whether the bouquet of flowers was a token, a symbol of a promise or a message from beyond. The fact that such delicate, real flowers could be found in the midst of a harsh winter in northern Iraq defies all the laws of nature. And yet, those who witnessed the event insisted that they were real, that every petal and stem was genuine. I don't share this story lightly. In our conservative, rational community, such tales are met with skepticism, and discussing anything supernatural is taboo. Yet, I have no reason to believe that they were lying. I've heard similar accounts from other elders, all of whom insist that they, too, have seen strange, inexplicable occurrences during that era. It's as if the fabric of reality in that remote corner of northern Iraq was, for a brief moment, torn open, allowing something from another world to brush against ours. Now, whenever I see a bouquet of flowers on a cold winter day, I can't help but wonder if it might be a silent reminder of that night. I think of the rugged mountains, the narrow, snow-covered paths, and the faint, lingering memory of voices that spoke of a journey to far-off lands. I wonder if, somewhere out there, a small piece of that mystery remains, a secret hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to uncover it. I've grown older, and the sharp edges of that memory have softened, yet the questions remain. What was the true nature of that night? Were the figures real, or the product of a collective dream? And what message did the bouquet hold? Was it a warning, a promise, or simply a glimpse into a realm beyond our understanding? I may never have all the answers, but the story endures, a testament to the strange, inexplicable events that sometimes break through the surface of our everyday lives. This is not just a tale of UFOs or alien abductions. It is a fragment of our family's history, a secret passed down through generations, wrapped in mystery and whispered in the twilight. And though I don't speak of it often, I hold it close, a reminder that sometimes, in the most unlikely of places and times, the impossible becomes real, and the boundaries of our world are pushed ever so slightly, revealing the vast, unfathomable truth that we are never truly alone. Redditor 8. I've never told anyone this before, but I still remember that Thanksgiving trip during my undergrad days. One of those experiences that blur the lines between the ordinary and the inexplicable. It was the mid-90s, and my buddies, who were all big stargazers, invited me and another friend to visit a family in remote eastern Washington. The skies there were so clear, free from the urban haze, that even the faintest stars pierced the night like tiny beacons of wonder. We all thought it would be a great chance to escape the usual routine, enjoy a break from campus life, and revel in the beauty of a truly expansive sky. On the night in question, we found ourselves in a wide, open field surrounded by knee-high grass. The family's cottage sat at the edge of this field, its lights casting a soft glow over the landscape. We had spent the day catching up, sharing stories, and enjoying a hearty meal. And as the night deepened, we stepped outside to stargaze. The air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the relentless heat of the day, and we lay back on the grass, eyes fixed upward, marveling at the shooting stars that streaked briefly across the sky. Out of nowhere, as I was admiring a particularly bright meteor, one of my friends suddenly pointed to a bright light in the heavens. "What's that?" he asked, his voice laced with both excitement and uncertainty. I looked up, and for a moment it seemed to me that the light resembled a planet, glowing steadily amid the constellations. But then I noticed something odd. The object wasn't moving in a predictable, linear fashion like any satellite or planet should. Instead, it bobbed up and down, as if it were caught in a gentle, rhythmic dance, a movement that reminded me of a candle flickering in a soft breeze. I watched, mesmerized, as the object continued its bobbing motion for what felt like an eternity. Every so often, a few of the lights around it would break up into even smaller specks, then merge back together as if performing some intricate aerial ballet. At one point, the object suddenly fizzled out, its glow dimming rapidly until it disappeared completely, leaving us staring at the dark, star-strewn sky in bewilderment. The incident left an impression on us, but it was nothing compared to what happened later that night. After the light show, we wandered back toward the cottage, our conversation still abuzz with theories about what we had just seen. As we neared the edge of the field, we came across a man. A young fellow, not much older than us. He was curled up, with his arms wrapped tightly around his knees, shivering uncontrollably. What struck me immediately was his appearance. He was barefoot, not wearing a shirt, and all he had on was a pair of jeans. Considering it was late November and the chill in the air was biting, his lack of proper clothing was bizarre, to say the least. My friend and I exchanged uneasy glances. We hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach him or to simply keep our distance. The figure seemed so out of place in that wide, open field, like a specter or a lost soul wandering without purpose. Eventually, mustering some courage, we called out from a distance, "Hey, are you okay?" His eyes, wide and unfocused, stared back at us blankly. In a low, almost monotone voice, he replied, "I'm fine," though there was no warmth in his tone, only a palpable chill that spoke of deep, underlying fear. We inched closer, our footsteps muffled by the soft grass. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that he didn't belong there, especially not in that freezing cold. When we finally reached him, he mumbled that he needed to go to the hospital and wouldn't talk about how he got there. My friend, concerned and a bit panicked, quickly dialed 911. Within minutes, a police car and an ambulance pulled into the field from a nearby gas station, their flashing lights reflecting off the dew-covered grass. As we waited, I offered him my coat, something to ward off the bitter chill, and he accepted it with a quiet nod. The paramedics and police began asking us a few questions, but everything felt surreal. The man, who had remained largely silent, except for occasional, blank responses and a single query about a couple of constellations, was bundled into the ambulance without much explanation. My friend later told the story to his family, and while they thought it was spooky, they chalked it up to a run-in with a local junkie or someone who had lost his mind. That night, as we drove back to the cottage, the earlier light show we'd witnessed seemed like a distant memory, an odd anomaly that had passed quickly. I, however, couldn't shake the feeling that the two events were somehow connected, that the strange bobbing light in the sky and the inexplicable appearance of that disoriented young man were pieces of a larger, unspoken mystery. Years later, I still find myself thinking back to that Thanksgiving trip. I wonder if my friend ever checked on that man, if he ever learned what truly happened to him on that chilly November night. The story has been passed down in our circle with a mixture of disbelief and resigned humor, and while many dismiss it as a mere oddity, a quirk of fate in a remote part of Turkey, it continues to intrigue me. Sometimes I even revisit the memory in late-night musings, wondering if the universe occasionally tears open a small window to the inexplicable, letting through moments that defy logic and reason. I'm not one to indulge in tall tales or let my mind wander too far into the realm of the supernatural, but the memory of that night remains vivid. It's a reminder that sometimes in the midst of the mundane, the universe has a way of revealing its hidden secrets, no matter how brief or unsettling they might be. And though I've grown up and moved on, that Thanksgiving trip in the 90s with its bizarre, unexplainable occurrences will forever be etched in my mind as a time when the ordinary world was briefly transformed by the extraordinary. Redditor 9. I still remember that Canada Day in West Vancouver like it was yesterday. I had totally forgotten about it for years until I stumbled upon a thread back in 2007 that mentioned a similar experience. That day, I was with my girlfriend at a stunning viewpoint overlooking the downtown core, where the city lights twinkled like scattered jewels against the deep blue of the early evening sky. The air was cool and crisp, a perfect summer evening by the ocean, and everything felt ordinary, serene even. I was an undergrad at the time, and as any teenager with a passion for stargazing and a taste for adventure, I couldn't resist capturing the moment. I pulled out my old beat-up camera, what I used to call my potato camera because of its grainy quality, and set it to rapid-fire mode. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, I just wanted to document the dazzling view, the interplay of light between the city and the night sky. I held down the button for about 10 seconds and the camera snapped away, taking roughly 30 pictures in rapid succession. At that moment, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. The city was bustling quietly below, and the stars seemed to shine with an almost familiar glow. I laughed with my girlfriend as we admired the view, completely unaware that somewhere in those 30 rapid shots, a secret was being captured. A secret that would later disturb my sense of reality. The next day, during a mundane lunch break at school, I casually scrolled through the photos on my computer. I was looking for the perfect shot of the downtown skyline when I stumbled across 3 images that made my heart skip a beat. They were taken only fractions of a second apart, and in them, I saw something I couldn't explain. In these photos, there was a bright, intense light streaking across the sky, moving in a way that defied normal expectations. It wasn't a shooting star, nor was it the linear, predictable path of a satellite. Instead, it was squiggly, erratic, and strangely mesmerizing. I stared at the images for what felt like an eternity. I zoomed in, trying to discern any detail, a hint of a structure, a silhouette, but all I could see was that overwhelming, brilliant light. It moved so fast, and its path was so unpredictable that I couldn't imagine any conventional aircraft could pull it off. I remember thinking, what in the heck is that? My mind raced with questions. How could something that looked like a craft move so quickly across the sky? And why hadn't I seen it with my naked eye while taking the pictures? I've always considered myself a rational person, skeptical of UFOs and the like, but those photos left me shaken. I debated with myself. Maybe it was a quirk of my old camera, a lens flare or a digital glitch, but the more I looked at them, the more I became convinced that what I had captured was something truly extraordinary. It wasn't claiming to have seen little green men. Rather, I knew what I saw wasn't a satellite, nor was it any conventional airplane or meteor. It was something moving in bizarre patterns, something that defied the laws of physics as I understood them. I tried to rationalize it away. Could it be an experimental craft, skunkworks technology maybe, operating under secretive government projects? Perhaps, but then I recalled that on that night, while I was lost in the beauty of the skyline, there had been nothing to indicate any military activity, nothing unusual except for that solitary, mysterious light. The explanation that seemed most plausible to my overactive scientific mind was that it was some sort of atmospheric phenomenon, similar to those rare plasma balls occasionally reported by stargazers. And yet, even that explanation felt incomplete. Why would such a phenomenon move in a squiggly, erratic manner? And why would it appear so intense, like it was burning with a purpose? That day, I mentioned the photos to a few friends. Most laughed, dismissing me as the UFO guy with his potato camera and wild imagination. They said, "Come on, it's just a camera glitch," and brushed off my excitement with a wave of their hand. But something inside me knew that wasn't all there was to it. I felt a quiet, persistent conviction that the universe had once again whispered one of its secrets to me, briefly revealing a glimpse of something vast and unknowable. I've spent countless nights revisiting those images, trying to decipher their hidden meaning. I even posted them on a few online forums, hoping to hear some non-extraterrestrial explanation, something about optical phenomena or a rare atmospheric event. Most responses were skeptical, pointing to the limitations of my old camera, but a small few were intriguingly supportive, sharing their own experiences of fleeting, unexplainable lights dancing across the sky. Those conversations only deepened my fascination and my lingering doubt about the nature of what I had seen. Now, whenever I find myself in a quiet spot in Southern California, sitting on my porch with a beer in hand and the stars overhead, I can't help but wonder if that mysterious light might appear again. I often think about the possibility that our world is filled with secrets, brief, stunning moments when the boundaries between the known and the unknown blur, and for an instant, the cosmos reveals its hidden wonders. And even though I strive for rational explanations, a part of me remains open to the possibility that something extraordinary might be happening in the sky above, something that defies all conventional logic. I don't claim to be a UFO believer in the sensational sense, but I can't ignore the evidence of that night. I know what I saw in those 3 photos. a light that moved in impossible ways, a flash of brilliance that couldn't be explained by any ordinary means. And even if it was nothing more than a quirk of nature, a rare meteorological event, it remains a vivid reminder that sometimes the universe chooses to show us a glimpse of its true, unfathomable beauty, if only for a fleeting moment. So when I look up at the stars, I do so with a mix of skepticism and wonder, ever aware that out there in the vast darkness, something might be moving in ways we have yet to understand. And in those moments, I'm reminded that while the world often insists on order and predictability, the cosmos is far more chaotic and mysterious than we can ever truly comprehend.